The cold autumn rain slicked the streets of the city, blurring the neon lights into long watercolor streaks against the dark asphalt. Inside the Golden Mile Café, however, it was a world away. The air was warm, thick with the scent of expensive coffee and overwrought perfume. It was a place of polished brass, dark wood, and the low, self-satisfied hum of conversations about stock portfolios and European holidays. Into this world of curated perfection walked Anna Petrova. She moved with a quiet deliberation, her weight supported by a simple, unadorned wooden cane that seemed to absorb the opulent light of the chandeliers rather than reflect it. Her coat was a practical gray, her boots sensible, and her face, though etched with a premature weariness around the eyes, held a profound and unbreakable stillness. She was an island of stark reality in an ocean of glittering superficiality. Her presence was a dissonant note in the cafe's symphony of wealth, and it did not go unnoticed. At a central table, a group draped in designer labels and dripping with jewelry paused their laughter to watch her. The leader of this pack, a man named Chadwick, whose suit cost more than Anna's rent for a year, leaned into his companion, a woman named Tiffany with diamonds in her ears and ice in her eyes. "Look at that," he murmured, his voice a conspiratorial sneer. "Did someone from the soup kitchen get lost?" Tiffany let out a tittering laugh, covering her mouth with a perfectly manicured hand. "Honestly, Chad, they should have a dress code." "It's depressing." Their friends joined in the quiet, cruel chorus of chuckles. They thought they were being discreet, but in the acoustically pristine environment of the cafe, their words carried like poisoned darts. Anna heard them. She always heard them. In places like this, she was an expert in the language of whispers and sideways glances. But years of enduring, far worse than petty scorn, had forged her face into a mask of serene indifference. She did not flinch. She did not look their way. She simply continued her steady, rhythmic path to the counter, the gentle tap of her cane on the marble floor, a quiet defiance. They thought she was a nobody, a broken woman to be pitied and mocked. They had no idea who they were dealing with or who was about to walk through that door. If you believe in the power of quiet strength, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss what happens next. The cafe's owner, a kind, balding man named Mr. Henderson, saw her approach, and his face broke into a genuine warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Anna, good to see you. The storm is a nasty one." Began preparing her order without needing to ask. "One black coffee, no sugar." "It's just weather, Henry," she replied, her voice low and even, a surprising well of calm. "It passes." His table, Chadwick watched the friendly exchange with disdain. "He knows her name," he scoffed to his audience. "Of course. This probably gives her the day-old pastries for free." More laughter. They saw a charity case, straight taken in by a soft-hearted old man. They saw what they wanted to see, a confirmation of their own superiority. Anna took her coffee and paid with the exact change, her movements economical and precise. She turned, scanning the room not for a seat but through a habit ingrained by a life they could never comprehend. Her eyes, for a fleeting second, met Chadwick's. There was no anger in her gaze, no fear, no shame. There was just a quiet, unnerving assessment. It threw him off for a moment. He expected her to look away, cowed. She did not. She simply held his gaze for a beat before turning to a small, empty table by the rain-lashed window. The brief connection, the lack of expected deference, pricked his pride. The game, for him, was no longer just a passive mockery. It was now a challenge. Anna settled into the small chair, placing her cane carefully beside her. The warmth of the ceramic mug seeped into her hands, a small comfort in a world that often felt cold. She didn't look at the other patrons. She looked out at the rain, at the city lights bleeding into a beautiful, chaotic mess. Her mind drifted not to the insults whispered behind her, but to another time, another storm. Not of rain, but of fire and sound. She remembered the jarring shudder of the USS Resolute, the scream of twisting metal, and the acrid smell of electrical smoke. She remembered the weight of a fellow sailor, unconscious and limp, as she dragged him through a corridor where the very air was hot enough to scorch the lungs. She remembered the piece of falling debris that had pinned her leg, the searing, white-hot pain, and her own refusal to let go of her shipmate. The cane beside her wasn't a symbol of her weakness. It was a testament to his life. It was a monument to a choice she would make again without hesitation. The dull ache in her leg was a constant reminder, not of what she had lost, but of what had been saved. This quiet cafe, these preening people, they were nothing. They were ghosts, their words weightless echoes in a life that had been defined by substance and sacrifice. But the ghosts were persistent. Tiffany, deciding she needed to powder her nose, chose a path that led her directly past Anna's table. With a theatrical little stumble, she let her $1,000 handbag swing out, catching the top of Anna's cane. The simple wooden staff clattered onto the marble floor. "Oh my goodness," Tiffany exclaimed, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "I am so terribly sorry. It's just so... cluttered over here. Should really be more careful with your... things." Several people at her table snickered. Mr. Henderson, behind the counter, gripped a cleaning cloth so tightly his knuckles turned white. He took a step forward, his mouth open to intervene, to defend the quiet woman he had come to respect so much over the years. But before he could utter a word, Anna leaned down, her movements fluid despite the ache. She picked up her cane without a single word of complaint. As she straightened up, she ran a hand along the smooth, worn wood, her gaze distant. And then she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the low hum of the cafe with the clarity of a bell. It wasn't directed at Tiffany or anyone else. It was a soft, reflective statement made to the cane itself. "It has seen worse." The simple, cryptic phrase hung in the air. Tiffany froze, a look of confusion clouding her sharp features. "What did you say?" Chadwick leaned forward, his arrogance piqued by the puzzle. "What's that supposed to mean? Did you drop it down the stairs?" He laughed, a loud, braying sound that invited his friends to join in. The atmosphere in the cafe had shifted. The other patrons, the silent witnesses, were no longer just passively aware. They were watching intently now, a current of discomfort and anticipation running through the room. They sensed a confrontation was brewing, a clash between two different worlds that had collided in this small, overheated space. Anna simply took a slow sip of her coffee, her silence a canvas onto which they painted their own ignorant conclusions. She let them laugh. She let them judge. She knew, as she had known in the heart of the fire, that patience was a weapon, and the truth, when it finally arrived, would be louder than any of them could possibly imagine. The bell on the door of the Golden Mile Café chimed, a bright, cheerful sound that was utterly at odds with the event it announced. It wasn't one person, it was two figures, silhouetted against the gray, rainy afternoon, stepped inside. Then a third, and a fourth. It kept coming, filing into the opulent cafe, not with a clamor, but with a disciplined, unnerving silence. They were men and women, a diverse group united by a single, striking fact. They were all wearing the immaculate, crisp-dress white uniforms of the United States Navy. The effect was immediate and absolute. Chadwick's sneering laughter caught in his throat, dying with a pathetic gurgle. Tiffany's hand, midway to her glass of sparkling water, froze in midair. The entire cafe fell into a sudden, breathless hush. The only sounds were the soft, rhythmic patter of rain against the window panes and the almost imperceptible rustle of starched fabric as more than a dozen naval personnel ranged themselves near the entrance. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Their collective presence was a physical force, changing the very atmosphere of the room from one of casual arrogance to one of profound gravity. They stood with a relaxed yet rigid posture that spoke of years of training, their faces composed, their eyes scanning the room with a calm, purposeful intensity. They were not customers. They were a delegation. Their gazes swept past the stunned faces of Chadwick and his friends, past the other curious patrons, till they all settled on the small, quiet woman sitting by the window. They found Anna. One of the officers, a man with the silver eagles of a captain gleaming on his collarboards, detached himself from the group. He was tall and carried an air of quiet, unquestionable authority. His face was weathered, kind, but his eyes held the focused steel of a career commander. He moved through the tables, the stunned patrons parting for him, as if by instinct. He ignored Chadwick and Tiffany completely, as if they were nothing more than furniture. His path was direct, his focus singular. He stopped beside Anna's table and came to a respectful halt. He did not offer to help her. He did not speak. He simply stood, waiting. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken meaning. Slowly, Anna looked up from her coffee cup. Her face, which had been a mask of stoic control, softened. A genuine, weary, but beautiful smile touched her lips for the first time. She placed her mug down on the saucer with a soft click. Then, using her cane for support, she began to rise. As she got to her feet, something remarkable happened. Her posture changed. The slight slump of the weary civilian fell away, replaced by the ramrod-straight bearing of a soldier. The quiet dignity she always possessed was now imbued with an undeniable and formidable strength. She stood not as a victim, but as a peer. The captain gave her a short, sharp, respectful nod. "Petty Officer Petrova," he said, his voice a low, clear baritone that carried easily through the silent room. "It's time." In perfect, stunning unison, the entire unit of sailors behind him snapped to attention. The sound of a dozen pairs of heels clicking together on the marble floor was like a single, powerful thunderclap. It was a sound of absolute respect. It was a sound of unshakable loyalty. It was a sound that shattered the fragile, self-important world of the Golden Mile calf. Nathan's face was ashen, her makeup suddenly looking garish and cheap. She stared, her mouth slightly agape. "Officer," she whispered, the words barely audible, the title completely alien to her vocabulary and her understanding of the woman she had just mocked. The captain, hearing her, finally turned his head. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His gaze, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, fell upon Chadwick and Tiffany. "This woman," he began, his voice level but laced with a controlled fury that was more terrifying than any shout, "is Petty Officer First Class Anna Petrova. The cane you found so amusing is a consequence of an act of heroism for which she was awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. She used her body to shield a junior sailor from a blast in an engine room fire, and proceeded to pull 3 unconscious shipmates to safety." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "The leg that was crushed in that fire saved the life of a man who is now the Fleet Master Chief of the entire Pacific Fleet. So, you are mistaken. She is not disabled. She is a decorated American hero. And we," he gestured back to the silent, watchful unit, "are her family. We don't let anyone disrespect our family." The captain's words detonated in the silent cafe, the fallout a mixture of shock, shame, and awe. The air crackled with the raw power of the truth revealed. Chadwick's face, usually a mask of smug confidence, had collapsed into a pasty, slack-jawed mess. Tiffany looked as if she'd been physically struck, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, not of empathy, but of profound social miscalculation. They had mocked a pauper and discovered a princess, but her royalty was not of birth or wealth. It was forged in fire and courage. The other patrons, the silent witnesses, were no longer silent in their expressions. Their faces were a gallery of reactions, open-mouthed astonishment, dawning respect for Anna, and a unified, undisguised contempt for the bullies at the center table. The situational irony was so thick it was suffocating. Chadwick and Tiffany, who lived their lives in pursuit of status, had just spat in the face of someone whose status was earned with blood and valor, a currency they couldn't possibly comprehend. Captain Marcus Thorne let his indictment hang in the air for another moment before turning his back on them, a final, dismissive gesture. His focus returned entirely to Anna, his expression softening once more. "We're here to escort you, Anna," he said gently. "The ceremony is in an hour. They're unveiling the Petrova Award for Resilience at the Naval Academy today, named for you, to be given to the midshipman who overcomes the greatest adversity to graduate." He looked pointedly back toward the disgraced table, a concept some people might find foreign. He had twisted the knife and the entire room felt it. He then offered his arm, not out of pity, but as an equal, an escort of honor. "Ready to go, petty officer?" Anna's eyes were glistening now, not with the sting of insults, but with the warmth of a homecoming she never expected. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a tear of gratitude, of belonging, of being seen for who she truly was. She nodded, her voice steady. "I'm ready, Captain." She picked up her simple wooden cane. In the context of the last few minutes, the object had been transformed. It was no longer a crutch. It was a scepter. It was a war relic. It was a symbol of honor. As she took the captain's arm, the unit of sailors parted for her, creating a pristine white corridor of respect. She walked through them, her head held high, the quiet, rhythmic tap of her cane on the floor now sounding like a drumbeat of vindication. As she passed the table where Chadwick and Tiffany sat frozen in their public disgrace, Anna paused. She turned her head and looked directly at them. She said nothing. There was no "I told you so." There was no gloating. There was no anger. There was only a long, level, quiet gaze. It was a look that held a universe of meaning it saw there. Pettiness, their cruelty, their hollow existence. And it responded not with hatred, but with a deep, profound, and devastating pity. That look, in its silent power, was more damning than any verbal condemnation. With that final quiet act, she turned and walked out of the café, flanked by her captain and her honor guard, leaving behind a wake of shattered arrogance. Mr. Henderson, watching from behind the counter, had tears streaming down his own face, but he was beaming with pride. The remaining patrons slowly began to murmur, the spell broken, their conversations now exclusively about what they had just witnessed. But for Chadwick and Tiffany, there was only the crushing weight of silence, the feeling of dozens of pairs, of eyes boring into them, judging them. Their designer clothes felt like cheap, gaudy costumes. Their status had evaporated. In the Golden Mile Café, where they had reigned as kings and queens of scorn, they had been rendered utterly, irrevocably small.